It's the Andy Thompson Show on ESPN 97.7.
Wash. Our next guest is the longtime editor and writer for the Sports Business Journal, dishing out TV viewership data since 2006. He's also the host of the SBJ Sports Media Podcast. Please welcome Austin Karp. Back to you, Andy.
How's it going, Austin?
Going great.
I want to talk about this crazy number the NBA is going to get. $76 billion it's reported. That number for a guy like me who has felt over the last few years like interest in the NBA is waning, especially amongst guys my age. The NFL got $110 billion, NBA reportedly about 76. What is your take on that huge number that the NBA is going to get?
Yeah, the number has been out there for a little bit now. The Wall Street Journal kind of just confirming some reports that were out there. But by no stretch is this a done deal yet. There might even be a fourth package out there that allows TNT to stay. So I think they may have jumped the gun a little bit in reporting that there's a deal out there or that's done. My sources tell me that there's still a lot to work through, a lot of lawyer stuff to work through. And the reason that you saw this report come out today in the Wall Street Journal is because there is a lot of palace intrigue going on at NBC, Comcast, between the entertainment side and the sports side, because the entertainment side wants to keep creating shows, and the sports side wants to spend that money on adding sports for Peacock so they can get viewers to go to that streaming service. That would mean less money to create original shows for Peacock and for NBC.
I see.
So it's a crazy number. It's still a crazy number, but like you said, NBA, the viewership is never going to be what it was during the Michael Jordan years. It's never going to get back to that. But it's very steady, and it's a very popular, very young media property, and it does produce kind of consistent viewership every season.
And they just regenerate stars, man. I was talking earlier on in the show, like, okay, the LeBron era is kind of ending, but now you got stars. You got Luka and Anthony Edwards and all these guys. They just restock them better than probably any other league. My other question about it was about TNT. So is there still hope that TNT can get in on this deal? It sounds like there is, but what is the likelihood? Because for me, Barkley is one of the number one assets that NBA coverage has.
Oh, absolutely. He's a gem, and he's so important to the overall image of the NBA. That is such a great show inside the NBA.
Yeah.
I think there is a possibility that TNT sneaks in some sort of smaller fourth media rights deal. What would it be? Maybe one game a week. Maybe that's something they have. Maybe they don't have the playoffs. But if you're the NBA, what the next media rights deal is going to look like. You're going to have ESPN as your primary carrier. The NBA Finals is going to remain on ESPN and ABC, and the playoffs, that's pretty much locked in. Mm-hmm. But they wanted a streamer, a global streamer, because what is the NBA? You talked about Luka. You talked about Nikola Jokic.
Yeah.
This is a global league. Amazon is a global streaming property. They wanted the demographics and the commerce connections that Amazon is going to be able to deliver. So they're going to be a partner. And then it's what kind of package does NBC get? The numbers that are being thrown out there, it is a crazy number that they are potentially overpaying to get the NBA because they want more sports. Because what did this past NFL season show? When they had that one NFL playoff game on Peacock, a lot of the people that signed up for it stayed around. So sports is sticky in terms of these new streaming platforms. And if they have the NBA, will people stay around and maybe watch some other things that are going to be on Peacock? But I would not rule out TNT just yet.
So the annoyance of people, especially of the older generation, having to download some app just to watch one NFL game has seemed to pay off, it sounds like, because maybe not just the older people who hated it like me, but even younger people are probably sticking around just by getting those downloads, it sounds like.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't cancel their subscription after they sign up for something like that. They watch the football game, they're like, oh, this has, this library of movies that exists for NBC Universal. Like, there's some things on there I can watch. There's some original programming. And Peacock does continue to get better. But Peacock is bleeding money. I think it lost something north of $350 million in the last quarter for Comcast. So what can they do to add programming that will keep people coming to that platform? That's what they want in the NBA. It delivers, compared to something like baseball or golf or football, the NBA is infinitely younger in the terms of its demographics.
And did I see something that ESPN has plans for a different kind of direct-to-consumer thing that they're going to put out? Or is it ESPN Plus is just going to continue, or what can you tell us about that, Austin?
So right now, we have ESPN Plus, but most of the big properties that are out there, you're continuing to get that on ESPN. You can stream stuff. If you're streaming on YouTube TV, you need to understand that is definitely completely different from ESPN Plus. That is strictly, you have to pay just to get that. And it's smaller properties out there, a lot of European soccer, a lot of smaller college conferences out there. So what's next for ESPN? You're going to see them launch, like you said, this standalone Peacock, Netflix type of property where it is just alone and you pay there to go and get the biggest sports. It'll basically replace ESPN Plus, but be a bigger, broader version with more content, more offerings. And the NBA would be a key part of that. And probably another reason they're going to want to keep something like the UFC when those media rights come up in a year, because that also delivers a young, very streaming-savvy demographic.
Talking with Austin Karp from the Sports Business Journal. Check out the SBJ Sports Media podcast for all the best in this stuff that we're talking about. I've got a million other questions. I'm going to keep it to about. I got a potpourri for you here, Austin. First of all, does the Live Tour have a realistic chance of gaining TV audience, or is that never going to happen at this point? Is there enough sample size of we've had enough tournaments and enough golf that the Live Tour is never going to get much revenue in TV based on what we've seen so far?
No, I don't see it as a viable TV property. Especially staying on something like the CW. You're talking about being outdrawn by something like minor league soccer on CBS. It's not getting the numbers. It's lower than WNBA, NWSL. Nobody is watching Live Golf on TV. The PGA Tour and the Saudi Public Investment Fund have to figure out how to come to some sort of agreement, really, to save golf, because it's not just nobody watching Live Golf. Fewer people are watching the PGA Tour because they're kind of just disillusioned. You saw something like a 39% decrease in the final round this past Sunday. You were seeing those sorts of drops for the PGA Tour. And the only thing that can, make golf numbers go up these days is Scotty Scheffler trying to get away from the police at a major.
Fantastic. Okay, I was listening to you talk with Joel Klatt today on the podcast about the UFL. I haven't watched a game of the UFL. But it sounds like they're doing pretty good in the ratings and that they're going to be back next year possibly, which is a shock to me anytime one of these spring leagues doesn't go bankrupt 3 games in. What are they doing right, and has it surprised you?
Well, the first thing they did right was merge the 2 leagues, the USFL and the XFL. You definitely didn't need 2 leagues.
Sure.
So what then creates a viable business model? They're getting, just south of 1 million viewers for these games, and they are in windows after the first of the year when they're really, it's not a lot on in the spring. It started, I think, later in the spring. There just isn't a lot on. College basketball regular season is pretty much over. So they found a window there on Fox, ABC, ESPN, where they're filling content. You go into a sports clips, and what's on the weekend? UFL football, because there was just nothing else that they can air, especially in the afternoons, on a weekend. NBA is not on. That's usually a primetime sort of thing. So they're finding windows, and that was especially important this season. Games weren't buried on FX or USA or FS1. You saw a ton of games, ABC, Fox. Only one game was on the Deuce. Only one game was on FS1. When you can get those sorts of really, well-distributed windows, you're going to get good numbers.
You got a chance.
Fox is part owner of the league, so they're invested in it too. They want to see it succeed.
I've been talking a lot about Caitlin Clark, just like everybody else in the country. What are you seeing over the past few weeks of the WNBA, the premiere versus now, and what do you foresee as far as the television numbers for WNBA games if she doesn't have a crazy rookie season where she's starting to play a little bit better?
That's if she survives. If these fouls continue, she's going to be on the injured list.
Yeah, right.
But, these early games, the best perspective I can give is that it's like a mini version of what Tiger Woods was able to do. Whenever Tiger Woods was on golf, people watched it. When he wasn't playing, the viewership was so-so. That is kind of what we're seeing a little bit on the WNBA side. They have produced, her games have been 4 of the most watched regular season games in 22 years this season to date. She has set records this season so far on 6 different networks, like ABC, The Deuce, ESPN, ION, which has a package of games, CBS. So they're spreading the love, they're setting records. But when she's not playing, you are seeing a little bit of an uptick, a rising tide for games that involve like Angel Reese and the Chicago Sky, or these super teams that they have with the Las Vegas Aces and the New York Liberty, and watching Diana Taurasi's, final season, maybe final seasons with the Phoenix Mercury. I think it's going to be a rising tide. You're going to see record viewership, I believe, at least dating back to the NBC years during those first couple late 90s seasons. It's going to harken back to those sorts of viewership when there was that initial intrigue.
Because I guess my thing was, I guess people are going to root for Caitlin and watch Caitlin, and now that she's she's on a bad team, she's struggling a little bit. Now it's kind of a underdog story to root for her and kind of attaching themselves to that narrative. Do you see it that way? Because I was like, she's got to be awesome right away. She's got to maintain eyeballs from the March Madness. She's got to come in and blow the league out of the water, which she hasn't really done yet. But apparently she's still, the ratings are still there for her.
The ratings are still there. The crowds are still there. They've only had a few, I think fewer than 5 games, or maybe 5 games for the Indiana Fever, and they've already outdrawn the total for last season.
Yeah,
so the ratings are there. The ticketing is there. Yeah, it's gonna be a tough slog for her, but there's a reason the Indiana Fever had the number 1 overall pick.
Yes, they're terrible.
The second straight year they had it too. They're just not a good team. I mean, look at what the Spurs were doing this year. They got Victor Wembanyama with the number 1 pick. But, what they win, 12, 13?
Yeah, they're horrible.
Terrible season for them. It's a rebuild, but what is she going to do? She's going to make them progressively better. It took Michael Jordan a long time to win some titles, too. Let's everyone remember that. It's not an overnight thing. She is not LeBron James. She's not going to come in averaging, 20 and 10.
Yeah. I was interested in hearing you discuss Pat McAfee on your podcast, and I'm curious how you kind of compare and contrast what he's doing with what Stephen A. Smith has done for years. In other words, ESPN is usually about not stirring up controversy and kind of being whatever. And now you've got Pat McAfee, who on a daily basis he's getting eyeballs, and that's why he's getting millions of dollars. But what is he doing maybe differently than Stephen A. Smith, who has been able to sustain for so long as the biggest star on ESPN, in your opinion?
I think the difference is Stephen A. Smith just yells very loudly no matter what he's talking about. It might not be offensive, but it's just screaming at the TV. I can't even really listen to him anymore. What Pat is saying, is just really offensive stuff. Like using the B word to describe Caitlin Clark. Who does that? And, the viewership, the eyeballs on TV, they're not there. This guy isn't drawing millions of viewers. He's getting maybe a couple 100,000 viewers. Where you get the big play from him is he's on YouTube. You get the social media. It is a complete barstool sports type of play for that sort of crowd. You were hoping that he doesn't turn into one of those barstool sports type of guys. But yeah, he is. He's got to be on thin ice, and it ain't cheap. They're paying this guy $17 million a year. While at the same time, they were cutting jobs. So
they apparently got rid of the main bigwig who was against McAfee for McAfee, right? So to me, that says they're really buying into McAfee for the long term. But maybe he runs out of friends in the.
Yeah, that guy Norby Williamson, who was a 30-year executive at ESPN. Yeah, he was kind of the guy who'd go after this talent that got off the rails, and they got rid of him because he was being called out on air by McAfee. But if you're the leaders of ESPN, this is something we talked about in the pod. You got to be really close to wondering when it's time to pull the plug. There has to be something contractually that if he does something that is really off the rails and really offensive, they have it out there.
Austin Karp, everybody. Go listen to the podcast, SBJ Sports Media Podcast and the Sports Business Journal for the best in sports media. Austin, it was a pleasure speaking with you. I love your stuff. Thanks for making time for us, and hopefully we can speak again.
I really appreciate it.
Quick break. Back with more right after this.